In this exam skills screencast, I'm going to explain what I would be thinking if I was tackling a Component 1 examination paper for A-level Sociology. So I'm going to go through, question by question, exactly what should be going through your mind when you tackle an exam paper in terms of time management and examination technique. So from the moment that you get into the exam, your mind needs to be active. And before you turn over the exam paper, you'll be able to look at the front cover. So here we can see the name of the subject, the name and title of the component, and then very importantly, we've got the time here allowed for this particular paper. So you have 2.5 hours for this particular component, and that means that time management, how you make use of that time, is going to be critical to your success. So this is what the rest of the front cover of the Component 1 exam paper will look like. So let's just have a look at some of these instructions. So at the top here, it says that in addition to this examination paper, you will need a 12-page answer booklet. So you will also be given that in the exam. And when you're writing your answers within that 12-page answer booklet, don't cross things out. The reason for that is as soon as you put a line through anything that you've written, the examiner is not allowed to give you marks. And sociology is based on a philosophy of positive marking. So if you do write stuff that is irrelevant or factually incorrect, you won't be deducted marks. They will just move on to the next section. My other advice is to start each question on a new page, and the reason for that is twofold. Firstly, it makes it easier for the examiner to work out where a question starts and begins, and also if you've left some space at the end of an answer, if later on in the exam you realise that there's an important point that could be added to that particular answer, you can come back to it. Now moving down to these instructions, it says to answer section A. As we'll see in a moment, that's the section that assesses your knowledge and understanding of the concepts of culture, socialisation, social control and identity, the building blocks work that we did at the beginning of the first year. It says to answer one question from section B, which in your case will be on youth cultures, and then one question from section C, which in your case will be the media. And both of the questions for section B and section C have two parts to them. There is a 15-mark question for each section that you have to do, and then you have to do one of two 35-mark questions, as we'll see in a minute. Here we can see the mark allocations for each of the three sections, and what's really important in terms of the mark allocation is that should dictate how much time you spend on each section of the paper. So when you turn over your exam paper, at the top it will have this instruction to answer section A, and then one option from section B, remember that's on youth cultures, and then one option from section C, remember that that's on the media. This is the layout for section A of component 1, and what I would be thinking as I start the exam paper is that in terms of time management, I need to spend about 25 minutes of my time on this section of the exam. And the way in which I would divide up that time is I would spend 5 minutes writing an answer to 1A, 15 minutes writing an answer to 1B, and that gives me a spare 5 minutes to read both of the questions carefully and also to scan the item carefully. Now at the top of the question it says to read the item and answer the following questions. The item is this short bit of text that appears above the two questions for this section. My advice though would be to read the questions first and then to read the item. You can get more out of the item if you've got an idea of the focus of the question first of all. You can then scan the item for material that will help you with the two questions. So question 1A will always start with the instruction with reference to the item and sociological knowledge explain the meaning of the term, and then the term will be connected to culture, socialization, identity and social control. And in order to get all 5 marks, you need to make 3 specific points. One of those points needs to be a definition, which hopefully you've memorized before going into the exam, and also one of those points has to relate back to the item because that's an explicit instruction in the question. So most candidates for the 5-mark question would be writing between 3 or 4 sentences. So you could think about it as 1 or 2 sentences to define the term, a concrete example of your own, and then a link to the item. And in this question, the term highlighted is agencies of socialization. And this is one of those terms that actually has 2 parts to it that need to be defined and explained. So I think you would need to explain what the concept of socialization refers to and what specifically are meant by agencies. And then if I was looking at this 15-mark question, again I would be thinking that I must use the item because that's an explicit instruction in the question always, but also I've got to use my sociological knowledge. So I can't just treat this as a comprehension exercise. I can't just copy stuff verbatim from the item. I've got to develop that material and add to the points made in the item using my own knowledge. And I've got to use this as an opportunity to show off my knowledge of key terms and then concrete examples that show that I understand the key concepts that I'm going to use. So this question is asking you to explain how culture is transmitted. If the examiner talks about the transmission of culture, what they really want you to talk about is socialization. And a good way of answering this particular question would be to focus on how 2 agents of socialization transmit norms, values, roles, other aspects of culture. So for example, you could use the 2 examples that are given in the item, parents and schools, as your examples of agencies of socialization. Now the item has lots of material that can help you with the questions. The first sentence that I've highlighted is an explanation of cultural transmission, which you can see is linked to the idea of agencies of socialization. You've got reference to different nationalities having different cultures. So I would be thinking there about concepts such as cultural diversity and cultural relativity. We've got different elements of culture identified in the item, language, dress, and other symbols. So I might be thinking of linking that to the concepts of material and non-material culture. We've got examples of agents of socialization, parents and schools, and we've also got reference to national identity being another important component of culture. Now section B of component 1 begins with the instruction, choose one from the following options. You only do option 2. So you can just put a line through option 1. In fact, even reading these questions on families and households would be a waste of your precious time. Ignore this section and move straight down to option 2. So option 2, as we can see here, is on youth cultures, and for these questions I would suggest that you do a brief plan for both of the questions. And you've got a 15-mark question that you have to do. You can see that this is a compulsory question, and I would recommend that you spend around about a minimum of 15 minutes on this particular question and a maximum of 20 minutes. Notice that the command word is explain. What that means is that a knowledge-driven answer is fine for this question. You don't need to display the skill of explicit evaluation for the 15-mark question. And this question is asking you to explain the relationship between gender and membership of youth cultures. And what the examiner will be looking for a 15-mark question is both depth and range. So for a range of points, you really need a minimum of 3 points, and then in terms of depth, each of those points needs to be fully explained and linked to relevant examples and evidence. The key thing is to be guided by time. So if you can make 4 points fully explained and linked to relevant evidence, then do so. Then we've got the 35-mark question, and you can see here with this instruction, either or, you've got a choice. So read both of these questions carefully in order to make your mind up about which of the questions that you want to do. So I'm going to imagine that I've chosen to do question C. In terms of time management, I would be thinking that I need to spend between about 40 and 45 minutes on this particular question, including the time to do a plan. And this question has an evaluation command word. So it starts with the instruction evaluate. So in this type of question, it's not enough to just display knowledge. You've got to evaluate the arguments that you present throughout your answer, so not just in the conclusion. Any question that starts with the command evaluate the view, I'd be thinking a way of planning that question would be to adopt this 4-part essay structure, consisting of an introduction, arguments and evidence that support the view, arguments and evidence against the view before drawing a conclusion. But I'd be thinking very hard about making sure that I include explicit evaluation throughout my answer rather than just relying on juxtaposition. Now remember, one way in which you can practice the types of 15 and 35-mark questions that come up on component 1 is to make use of these exam skills flashcards on Brainscape. So for example, here's a flashcard that will help you with the second of the 2 35-mark questions that we saw on our practice exam paper on youth cultures and deviancy. And here's the other flashcard that goes with this type of question, where you've got to evaluate the view that youth cultures are associated with deviant behaviour. Now the final section of the exam is section C. Again, the instruction is to choose one from the following options. So you will see on the real exam paper that there are 3 options for this particular paper, and you only do option 2, which is the section on the media. So cross out or just ignore option 1, which is on education, and option 3 at the bottom of the paper, which is on religion. Again, even reading those sections is a waste of your precious time. So option 2 on the media is laid out in a similar way to the youth culture questions, and the advice on time management would be the same. I would be thinking that I need to spend 15 to 20 minutes on the 15 marker and then 40 to 45 minutes on the 35 marker, and once again there is a choice here. So I only do one of the 35-mark questions, but I have to do this 15-mark question. Once again, for the 15-mark question, I'd be thinking that for depth and range, I need to make 3 to 4 relevant points, fully explained, with reference to evidence and examples, as stated in the question. And we can see that this question, I've got to explain at least 3 ways in which media professionals can influence the content of the news. And if the examiner uses the term media professionals, I'd be thinking that I need to discuss the role of the people that work within the media, people like journalists and editors, and I'd be thinking of linking that to the neo-Marxist perspective. Here's the 2 35-mark questions. Remember to read through both of these questions carefully, because you don't want to get into the exam, maybe start this particular question, get halfway through and realise that the other question would have been stronger for you. So this question is asking you to evaluate Marxist explanations of the ownership and control of the media. If examiners use this particular phrase, ownership and control of the media, that's the debate about who controls the media. Is it really the owners, which is the emphasis of Marxist explanations, or should we place more emphasis on the role of media professionals, or should we place more emphasis on the role of the audience? And this is how I might structure my answer to this question: an introduction, a explanation or summary of the Marxist view, and then plenty of evaluation in terms of both the strengths and weaknesses of this explanation before drawing my conclusion. And once again, there are some flashcards on Brainscape that will help you with this type of longer 35-mark question. Finally, the very last thing that I would be thinking in the exam, if I finish with a few minutes to spare, is I'd be thinking that I shouldn't just sit there doing nothing. I should really think about whether or not there's anything I could add to any of my questions, and to read and check my answer rather than just sitting there. The grade boundaries tend to be quite narrow, so you need to use every single minute when you're in the exam.